Welcome back from the break. You're still watching Our Parliament, and I'm your host, Iguma Gabriel. Yes, sir, you had a question before we went for the break. Your name and your question or comment.
I'm called Jude Alom from Kampala. Yeah, I must say this is a good thing, the
Money Laundering Act.
Money Laundering Act is good. However, to me, I think it's more so fulfilling our international obligation as Uganda, but it does not look at the problem at hand. I'm wondering what has gone wrong with the Anti-Corruption Act.
All right, let's put that to Sydney. Sydney, what has gone wrong with the Anti-Corruption Act?
Absolutely nothing. The passage of the Anti-Money Laundering Bill does not in any way negatively impact on the Anti-Corruption Act.
No, I think his question in relation to the number of convictions, and I think people want to see recoveries after convictions.
The two shouldn't be tied hand. Two shouldn't go together. Like I said, these are two distinct offences. Why I say this act actually supports the anti-money, because, you know, as I've said, there are two world over. Countries are moving away from criminal-based convictions to civil-based. Forfeitures and recoveries. Now, with this act, you do not have to prove the corruption before you can secure a conviction. If, for example, somebody has embezzled money, or on his account he's seeing strange deposits from, maybe he has been having his salaries, then all of a sudden he's getting 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion within a very short time. The bank is under obligation to report to the Financial Intelligence Authority. Now, we may not be able to prove the source because the person may not disclose it, but we can prove to court that these deposits are not commensurate with this person's known line.
What happens to a bank that refuses to report?
It's a crime, and such any accountable person that does not report, it's a crime. It's a criminal offense, and then because there's a whole chapter on penalties.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's take another question very quickly.
Just before we do that, to add to what Sydney is saying, remember that if a bank does not report, you cannot. The directors will get into real trouble, and Bank of Uganda also has its own regulations. I suspect we might have one or two issues in terms of correlating the two, but that's beside the point. I think that it's important to understand that when it comes to the fight against corruption, that is one side of things, like Sydney is saying. But in this case, you're talking about a much wider scope than just getting a conviction on corruption. You're going beyond the conviction on money laundering to asset recovery, and the distinction in the way that is going to be done from the way it's been done in the Anti-Corruption Act is fundamental. But also, and more importantly, this act waives certain challenges that Sydney would have had. If he called me to a stand to testify as a lawyer, I would say attorney-client privilege. An accountant would say, a banker would say, my first duty to my client is secrecy. The banker-customer relationship under this act, you cannot use that as a source of, as a way to hide away from answering questions in court. And that is a major shift from the Anti-Corruption Act as you would know it. So this actually supplements, and in more ways that people will wake up and realize this corruption is going to be a bit tricky to deal with now.
Okay, let's take another question from the lady in black.
Binta Brenda. And if you look at, France, when you look at the son of Equatorial Guinea's president, Tedero Obiang, you realize that he's been indicated in money laundering, and they have done something. And as I speak right now, this week, they have dismantled a $4 billion money laundering operation. So we have had so many laws in Uganda. We have really had them. We have the Anti-Corruption Act. We have so many acts. We talk about the anti-pornography, bill, the law actually. But we have had them just in papers. How practical do you think this law is going to be?
Is this going to be enforced?
Really?
All right, Brenda is wondering, yes, we passed a good law. You have applauded the law. Is it going to be implemented?
Okay, the example you have given is a very good one, because Theodore Obiang, besides being the son of the president of Equatorial Guinea, is also one of the vice presidents, and he was minister for timber. In charge of timber and the rest. So he claims, besides being a minister, he's also
he does business and that money
but
could
he
come
had
from
properties in America and France, which have been frozen. But these initiatives to have these properties frozen was not an initiative of the two governments. In the case of France, it was a civil society organization, because they were saying that these governments were complicit in having these assets, because this guy had a lot of property in France. So the question is, how do you allow a minister? Because France and the US are both members of SML, of FATF. So they ought to have known that these were criminal, these were illicit flows into their country. They should have acted, but they did not. So it took the efforts of some NGOs. And it was not only targeting Equatorial Guinea, it was targeting 3 countries. The presidents of Equatorial Guinea, where is Compaoré? Burkina Faso, and then Gabon. Those were the 3, and their sons. Because, and interestingly, they intermarried. One married the other son. So it was a whole couple of yes.
Real money laundering.
Yeah, yes, they had. They are taking it to
another level.
Another level. So of course we are hopeful, because now the only way we can't pass judgment now, because the law has just been passed. But unlike other crimes where there's no one, it's left to the nationals. This one has an international framework where people are observing what you're doing. Because you make annual reports on how you're performing. Because now the next phase is what they call, it's risk-based approach. They say a country should identify its biggest money laundering risks. And then those are the areas you concentrate on. And then you say, how are you going to combat it? So there is another form of accountability apart from the nationals of the country. So it's too early to pass judgment. The board hasn't even been set up. The FI hasn't been set up. But I think when the two are set up, then you give it time to see how effectively it will perform. I'm very optimistic.
All right, let's take another question. Sydney is very optimistic that this law will be implemented. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask Honorable Sydney.
Sydney is not an honorable. But yes, Sydney is legal, Director Legal Affairs, IGG's office.
So, as you have talked about, this law has been in place for quite a long time, since 2001. But I find that there is a lot of Ugandan money hold up in Swiss banks, and the lists have been out in newspapers. I'm wondering, is this law going to make that money be recovered?
I think he's asking if there's going to be retrospective application of this law. Will it go for people who stole before November the 1st?
No, this law was passed in, it's not 2001, it is last year.
2013.
2013. Yes,
Anti-money laundering, 2013.
Now, Switzerland was known as a heaven because of the secrecy, those bank secrecy things. Now, but they are dismantling it. And that's why, for example, there are many lawsuits between the law enforcement authority in America. But the citizens, those people whose accounts were made known, are also suing, say the breach of privacy and all those things. But specific to the Ugandans who might have bank accounts. Now, it does not have to be deemed retrospective. The question will be account now. Because if there is a movement, that money is lying somewhere. If that money moves from where it is now, then you'll have committed the crime within the duration of this, when this act is already commenced. So this money is not going to be lying idle. That's not the reason why those monies are there. But besides this law, there are other crimes those persons were committed. They can still be followed up for those. If they stole the money, theft has been a crime even before we were independent. So those other crimes will still be applied to those kinds of individuals. It doesn't have to be the money laundering.